Okay, let's get into this. We're taking a deep dive today into some really cutting-edge areas that are fundamentally changing how we think about health and medicine.
Absolutely. We're pulling insights from some fascinating conversations Eric Tupel hosted recently.
That's right. First up, we'll be digging into the latest science on sleep with Professor Matthew Walker, and we're talking updates that go quite a bit beyond just counting hours.
hmm
Then we'll switch gears a bit, look at the bigger picture, the future landscape of life science, things like genomics, AI, and our understanding of the immune system, which is evolving so rapidly.
And for that, we're drawing on insights from Sir John Bell, who's a real visionary in those fields.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So the mission for this deep dive really is to pull out the most, impactful bits of knowledge from what these experts are saying.
Yeah, translating some quite complex research into hopefully surprising facts and insights that are actually relevant,
Yeah.
especially for professionals, working in industries touched by all these changes.
Because understanding this stuff isn't just academic curiosity anymore, is it? It feels key to navigating, well, both our personal health futures and the professional world in the next few years.
Couldn't agree more. It really is.
Right then, let's jump straight in. We'll start with the science of sleep, which is often, I think, underappreciated. And maybe begin with something quite unexpected, its social side.
Yes, it's become, well, increasingly clear that sleep's influence goes way beyond just us as individuals. Recent work has really shown a light on its crucial role in how we interact socially.
Which is surprising, isn't it? Because you tend to think of sleep deprivation effects as internal, your mood, your concentration, maybe physical health.
That's the traditional view, yes.
Yeah.
But it's about more than just how you feel when you haven't slept. It's actually about how that lack of sleep affects the people around you.
Okay, tell me more about that social dimension. What's the new thinking?
Well, there's some really compelling research, particularly from Dr. Eddie Ben Simon over at Berkeley. Her work demonstrates pretty clearly that sleep deprivation makes people measurably more asocial.
Asocial.
Yes. Essentially, not getting enough sleep seems to make you, well, she used the term, socially repellent.
Socially repellent. That sounds quite harsh.
It is a strong term, yes. But the data suggests that people who are underslept tend to withdraw socially.
Yeah.
They report feeling lonelier. And crucially, they seem to project something that makes other people less inclined to want to engage with them.
So people can actually sense it, even if they don't know you pulled an all-nighter.
It seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
The research showed that even when observers didn't know the person was sleep-deprived, they rated them as less socially appealing, less attractive to interact with.
Wow.
And here's where it gets, well, frankly, a bit alarming. The studies also found that after interacting with someone who was sleep-deprived, a person who was actually well-rested walked away feeling more lonely themselves.
No way. So a kind of social loneliness contagion. Your bad night's sleep can actually make someone else feel lonely just by talking to them.
Exactly. It's like a ripple effect, a sort of viral transmission of that feeling. And the work also uncovered another really significant social impact, a reduction in what they call helping behavior. Meaning, when you're insufficiently slept, you're simply less likely to offer help to others, even strangers. Your sort of default setting shifts towards being less altruistic, less pro-social.
And I remember reading there was population-level data on this too, something about daylight savings.
That's right, yes. The Daylight Savings Time study is a really striking example. They looked at charitable donations across the U.S. And in the days immediately after the clocks go forward in spring, when everyone loses that hour of sleep opportunity, there was a statistically significant drop.
A drop in donations.
A big dent, as Professor Walker described it, in national charitable giving, just from losing 1 hour of potential sleep across the population. It shows this reduced helping behavior playing out on a massive scale.
That's incredible. It really speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how fundamental sleep is for just, well, basic human cooperation and empathy.
It does.
And you can immediately see the professional implications. Teamwork, collaboration, effective leadership. They all rely so heavily on positive social interaction, on that willingness to help each other out.
Absolutely. If your team, or even just key people in it, are chronically underslept, it's bound to have a tangible negative effect on how everyone functions together. It's not just about individual performance, it's about the collective.
It really reframes sleep health, doesn't it? Not just a personal wellness thing, but almost a social or organizational imperative.
I think that's exactly right. A social imperative.
Okay, so that's the surprising social angle. What about the underlying biology? There's been a lot of talk about genetic short sleepers. Is that a real thing? Are some people genuinely okay on much less sleep?
Yes, it is real. But, and this is a huge, but it's incredibly exceedingly rare. For the vast, vast majority of us, that need for 7 to 9 hours is biologically baked in. The evidence for impairment below that is just overwhelming.
But there are some people.
There are. Science has identified this tiny, tiny subset of individuals who seem to genuinely thrive on significantly less sleep. Maybe 5 hours, maybe even a bit less. And critically, they show no apparent signs of impairment.
No impairment at all. That sounds like a superpower. It almost defies everything else we know about sleep debt.
It certainly seems that way, and researchers have actually pinpointed specific genes linked to this. The first one identified was called the DEC2 gene. A specific mutation in that gene seems strongly connected to this natural short sleep ability.
But you stressed how rare it is. How rare are we talking?
Professor Walker put it very starkly. He said, "You are statistically more likely to be struck by lightning in your lifetime than to have the specific genetic makeup that allows you to genuinely function perfectly well on very little sleep."
Struck by lightning.
Okay,
Yeah.
puts it in perspective. So most people who think they're fine on 5 hours probably aren't.
That's the overwhelming likelihood, yes. They might feel okay, or they've adapted subjectively, but objectively, they're likely accumulating significant sleep debt with all the downstream negative consequences for their health and cognitive function, even if they don't realize it.
Right. So why is this tiny group so interesting to science then, if it's that uncommon?
Because it poses this fundamental biological puzzle. How has Mother Nature, through just random genetic mutation, found a way in these few individuals to essentially, well, ZIP file sleep?
ZIP file sleep?
I like that analogy.
They somehow compress all the necessary functions that normally take 7 to 9 hours into maybe 5 or 6 and still seem to get all the benefits. The huge question is how? What are the molecular tricks? What are the mechanisms that let them do that?
And if we could figure that out,
If we could figure that out, it could unlock profound secrets about what sleep is actually for at a fundamental level, and potentially lead to new ways to help people with sleep problems, or maybe even enhance sleep efficiency for everyone else.
which I suppose immediately raises thoughts about future applications, maybe even trying to replicate it artificially.
Exactly. And that's where it gets complicated, ethically and societally. While the main scientific goal is understanding, the knowledge could lead down paths like developing drugs or, even genome editing to try and induce this short sleep ability.
And Professor Walker raised concerns about that.
He did. He talked about the risk of an arms race of de-escalation in sleep, a scenario where society, chasing productivity gains, pushes people towards less and less sleep, potentially overriding other vital functions of sleep that we don't even fully understand yet. It highlights why we need to really grasp the why and how before we start thinking about artificial manipulation.
Which is a perfect segue to another critical biological mechanism, the glymphatic system. This is the brain's cleaning crew, right?
That's a great way to put it, yes. It's basically the brain's equivalent of the lymphatic system that cleans waste from the rest of the body. The glymphatic system's job is to flush out metabolic byproducts that accumulate in the brain while we're awake.
Including things like the proteins linked to Alzheimer's.
Precisely. Things like beta amyloid and tau proteins. They're essentially the molecular garbage that the brain produces through its normal activity, and it needs to be cleared out regularly, otherwise it builds up and causes problems.
And the established view, the overwhelming evidence, has pointed to sleep being absolutely crucial for this process.
Yes, that's been the prevailing understanding for some time now, based on a huge amount of evidence from many different research groups across different animal species and increasingly in humans too.
The idea being that deep sleep is the prime time for this brainwashing.
Exactly. The data strongly suggested that sleep, particularly that deep, non-REM sleep, stage 3 sleep, provides the optimal window for this glymphatic system to really kick into high gear.
Why then? Why not when we're awake?
Well, the thinking is that when we're awake, the brain is just too busy processing information. There's less space between the brain cells, and the fluid flow needed for cleansing seems to be significantly reduced. Some researchers even describe wakefulness as a state of sort of low-level biochemical damage, and sleep provides the essential sanitary salvation.
But wasn't there a study recently that caused a bit of a stir, suggesting maybe clearance was higher when we're awake?
That's correct. A study published, I think, around 2022 or 2023, used some specific imaging techniques in humans and reported findings suggesting higher fluid flow and potentially higher clearance during wakefulness compared to sleep. which naturally seemed to contradict quite a lot of the previous work.
And what was the reaction from other scientists? Were there criticisms of that study?
Yes, researchers who'd been proponents of the sleep-dependent model raised several points about the methodology. They noted the use of imaging methods that weren't standard, or at least different from those used in many of the animal studies. There were also questions about an artificial method used to perfuse fluid through the brain, rather than observing the natural flow. And importantly, concerns about the sampling rate, whether it was fast enough to capture the crucial slow brainwave oscillations that happen during deep sleep.
These slow waves being important for driving the fluid flow.
That's the hypothesis, yes, that these very slow, large amplitude brain waves physically help to pump the cerebrospinal fluid through the brain tissue, facilitating that waste removal. So if the measurement technique missed those, it could skew the results.
So weighing everything up, what's the current sort of nuanced understanding? Is it all about sleep, or is it more complicated?
I think the picture is becoming a bit more nuanced than just saying it only happens during sleep. The glymphatic system is clearly dynamic. It's possible there's a kind of low battery mode clearance that can happen during quiet wakefulness.
But sleep is still king.
But the overwhelming weight of evidence, when you look across all the different studies, different species, different methods, still points very strongly towards sleep, especially deep NREM sleep, providing the optimal opportunity for a really thorough cleanse, a full biochemical reboot.
Like the difference between putting your phone on low power mode versus actually switching it off for a proper update and refresh.
That's a great analogy, yes. You might get some background tidying in low power mode, but the deep clean, the system overhaul, really happens when it's properly off. The bulk of evidence still firmly supports sleep as the preferential, most effective state for this vital brain maintenance.
It just makes intuitive sense, doesn't it, that such a complex, active organ needs dedicated downtime for housekeeping. And you mentioned a link between this glymphatic system and other parts of the body, like the heart.
Yes, that was fascinating. A paper in a cardiology journal reported that patients with atrial fibrillation, or AFib, a common heart rhythm problem, actually showed less active glymphatic clearance during their sleep.
Really? How does that connect?
It highlights this idea of cardiorespiratory neurophysiological coupling. It suggests it's not just the brain's electrical activity driving this fluid flow. The heart and the lungs, their rhythms during sleep, seem to synchronize with the brain's slow waves to help drive the pulsations needed for efficient clearance.
So it's the whole system working together, heart, lungs, brain, to wash the brain during sleep.
Exactly. It's a beautiful illustration of how sleep benefits the entire embodied organism, as Professor Walker put it. Your body and your brain are deeply interconnected in this process. Good cardiovascular and respiratory health might actually contribute to better brain cleansing overnight.
That link is quite profound. A heart condition potentially impacting brain maintenance. Wow. And speaking of things that impact sleep and potentially this glymphatic function, what about sleep medications?
Ah, yes, a critical area. And the research here has thrown up some quite surprising and frankly concerning findings, especially regarding the older, more established classes of sleeping pills.
You mean things like Ambien, the Z drugs, benzodiazepines?
Exactly. Those drugs, the ones often called sedative hypnotics, zolpidem, azolpiclone, zaleplon, and the older benzodiazepines like diazepam or temazepam, they primarily work by, well, broadly sedating the brain's cortex. They essentially just dampen down overall brain activity.
And they do help people sleep, or at least feel like they're sleeping more.
They certainly make you fall asleep faster, and they can increase the total time spent apparently asleep. On a standard sleep study, they might even show an increase in deep sleep minutes. However, and this is crucial, they seem to significantly alter the electrical quality or the signature of that deep sleep.
Alter the signature. What does that mean in practice?
It means they seem to create a substantial dent, as Professor Walker termed it, in those very large, very slow brain waves that are the hallmark of truly restorative deep NREM sleep. They suppress those critical slow oscillations.
The same oscillations thought to drive the glymphatic system.
Precisely. So, by suppressing those key brain waves, even if the sleep looks like deep sleep on a superficial level, the underlying functional machinery needed for optimal brain cleansing seems to be impaired.
So even if your sleep tracker says you got more deep sleep after taking an older sleeping pill, you might not actually be getting the brain cleaning benefits.
That's exactly what the evidence suggests. Pioneering work, particularly from Makin Nadergaard's lab using animal models, found that despite increasing sleep time and apparent deep sleep time, the actual brain lymphatic cleansing was reduced perhaps by 30% to 40% when these older sedative hypnotics were used.
Reduce, that's incredibly counterintuitive. You take something to help you sleep better, and it hinders one of sleep's key functions.
It is profoundly counterintuitive, yes. But it strongly suggests these drugs might be generating what's been called junk sleep, sleep that ticks the boxes on basic duration measures, but lacks some of the crucial functional properties, like efficient waste clearance.
That's a really significant finding, given how widely prescribed these medications are and have been for decades. Is there a newer approach, a different class of drug that might avoid this problem?
Yes, thankfully there is. There's a newer class of medications called DORAs. That stands for dual orexin receptor antagonists.
DORAs, okay. How do they work differently?
They represent a much more, well, elegant and targeted way to promote sleep. Instead of just blanketing the cortex with sedation, they target a very specific chemical system in the brain, the orexin system.
Orexin.
Orexin, sometimes called hypocretin, is a key neurotransmitter that acts like a wakefulness switch or volume control. Keeps us alert. DORAs work by blocking the receptors that orexin binds to, so they essentially just turn down the volume on wakefulness.
So less forcing sedation, more allowing sleep to happen naturally.
Exactly. It doesn't push the brain into an artificial state, but rather removes the wake-up signal, allowing the natural process of sleep onset and maintenance to emerge more easily when conditions are right. It's a much more subtle mechanism.
And have these newer DORA drugs been tested for their effects on lymphatic activity or brain cleansing?
Yes, and there's a very exciting and promising study that Professor Walker highlighted. It involved older adults, age 65 and up, using a DORA drug called suvorexant, brand name Belsomra.
What did that study involve?
It was a proper, rigorous, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. They gave the participants either suvorexant or a placebo. They measured not only how much sleep they got and how much deep NREM sleep, but crucially, they also measured the levels of those Alzheimer's biomarkers, beta amyloid and tau in the bloodstream before and after the night of sleep.
Okay, and what did they find regarding those biomarkers? Did the DORA help clear them?
They found that on the night the participants took the DORA drug, suvorexant, there was significantly greater clearance of both beta amyloid and tau protein from the brain into the bloodstream compared to when they took the placebo.
The opposite effect to the older drugs.
Exactly the opposite. It wasn't just increasing sleep duration or deep sleep minutes. It seemed to be generating genuinely functional sleep. Sleep that was actually facilitating the removal of these potentially harmful proteins linked to Alzheimer's disease.
That's a massive development.
It really is. Professor Walker framed it as potentially the first evidence we have of a sleep medication that not only helps you sleep in a more naturalistic way, but also seems to enhance the brain's own restorative cleansing processes. That could have huge implications for brain health, especially as we age.
It really drives home that not all sleep is created equal, especially when medication is involved. So quantity is important, obviously, but it sounds like we absolutely have to focus just as much, if not more, on sleep quality and also sleep regularity.
Absolutely. For years, the public health message, the whole conversation, was heavily skewed towards just getting enough hours, the quantity. And don't get me wrong, sufficient quantity is non-negotiable. You need that foundation.
But it's not the whole story.
Not by a long shot. Research, especially over the last decade or so, has made it increasingly clear that sleep quality and sleep regularity are equally, and in some cases more, predictive of critical health outcomes.
Like what kind of outcomes?
Things like all-cause mortality, your overall risk of dying from any cause, also cardiovascular disease risk, metabolic health, think diabetes risk, and potentially even cancer mortality as well. Quality and regularity are powerful predictors across the board.
Okay, let's unpack quality first. How is that usually defined or measured?
A common and useful metric for sleep quality is sleep efficiency. It's actually quite simple. It's the percentage of time you spend actually asleep while you're in bed trying to sleep.
Right. So if you're in bed for 8 hours but tossing and turning for 2, your efficiency isn't great.
Exactly. Generally, a sleep efficiency of 85% or higher is considered good, indicating solid consolidated sleep. When efficiency drops much below that, usually because your sleep is fragmented with lots of awakenings, that's when you start seeing problems.
And what kind of problems are linked specifically to poor quality fragmented sleep?
Pretty much system-wide impairments, increased risk of those metabolic and cardiovascular issues we mentioned, hormonal imbalances. But perhaps most strikingly, the effects on mood and mental health are profound.
How so?
It's a remarkable finding, But sleep is abnormal in every single psychiatric condition that's ever been studied. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, you name it, sleep is disrupted. And very often, the key feature isn't necessarily just short sleep duration, but severely fragmented, poor quality sleep. Poor sleep efficiency is a major red flag for mental health issues.
That really highlights how fundamental good quality sleep is for just, well, keeping everything running smoothly mentally and physically. Okay, what about regularity then? You said that's also vital, maybe even underappreciated.
Hugely underappreciated, I think, but absolutely vital. There was a really stunning study using data from the UK Biobank, this massive data set with hundreds of thousands of people.
What did they look at in that study?
They tracked not just how much sleep people were getting on average, but also how regular their sleep schedules were over many years. So, how consistent were their bedtimes and wake times from day to day, including weekends?
And what did they find about regularity versus quantity?
The results were quite remarkable. People who maintained high sleep regularity, basically going to bed and waking up around the same time every day, had a significantly lower risk of dying from any cause, from cancer and from cardiovascular disease, compared to those with very irregular schedules.
Even accounting for how much sleep they got overall.
Yes, and here's the kicker. When they statistically compared the predictive power of regularity versus quantity for all-cause mortality, regularity almost beat quantity.
Really? Almost more important than total hours slept. That feels counterintuitive if we've always been told, get your 8 hours.
It does, doesn't it? But it highlights something crucial. While you absolutely need sufficient quantity, being perfectly regular but only sleeping 4 hours a night isn't going to work. Regularity acts as a powerful anchor for your entire internal biological clock, your 24-hour circadian rhythm.
So keeping a consistent schedule helps keep your body clock stable.
Exactly. It sends strong, reliable timing signals to your brain and body every day. And having a well-aligned, robust circadian rhythm doesn't just directly benefit health, it also feeds back to improve both your sleep quantity and your sleep quality. They all reinforce each other: quantity, quality, and regularity. They're the three pillars of healthy sleep, and we need to pay attention to all of them.
Okay, so with all this detail stages, quality, efficiency, regularity, it's no surprise people are turning to technology. Sleep trackers, rings, watches, even smart mattresses now. Are these things genuinely helpful, or can they sometimes make things worse?
It's a great question, and the answer is, well, it depends. For the average person, someone who doesn't already have clinical insomnia or a lot of anxiety around sleep, tracking can generally be pretty useful.
Why is that?
Because sleep is notoriously difficult for us to judge subjectively. We're often quite bad at estimating how long it took us to fall asleep, how many times we woke up, how much deep sleep we got. Unlike, say, counting steps or tracking calories, which are more concrete. So the old adage, what gets measured gets managed, can definitely apply.
Can you give an example of how seeing the data might help someone change their behavior?
A classic one is alcohol. Many people are quite surprised, maybe even shocked, when they see the objective data from their tracker showing just how consistently even moderate alcohol consumption close to bedtime absolutely tanks their sleep quality.
How does it show up in the data?
Typically, you'll see reduced REM sleep, increased heart rate throughout the night, more awakenings, poor sleep efficiency. Seeing that pattern night after night can be a really powerful motivator to, say, cut back on evening drinking or stop drinking earlier.
Right, makes sense. If someone is thinking about getting a tracker, any tips on what to look for?
I think the key things are low friction and reasonable accuracy. Low friction just means it needs to be easy and comfortable enough that you'll actually wear it or use it every single night without it being a hassle.
So something like a ring might be lower friction than a watch for some people.
Potentially, yes. Or a smart mattress is perhaps the ultimate in low friction. It's just there, you don't wear anything. In terms of accuracy, especially for sleep staging, the technology is getting better all the time. Data generally suggests devices like the Oura Ring are currently among the more accurate wearables compared to gold standard sleep lab polysomnography, but others like Fitbit, Apple Watch, Whoop are also pretty good and constantly improving. Full disclosure, I should mention I have previously done some advisory work for Oura in the past.
Okay, useful context. But you mentioned a potential downside, particularly for some people.
Yes, and this is really important. For individuals who are already prone to anxiety, especially anxiety about sleep or maybe have perfectionistic tendencies, these trackers can sometimes backfire. There's a recognized phenomenon now called orthosomnia.
Orthosomnia? What's that?
It's basically where someone becomes so fixated, so obsessed with achieving the perfect sleep score or hitting ideal numbers on their sleep tracker app.
That the anxiety about it actually makes their sleep worse.
Exactly. The pressure to perform to get that perfect data creates stress. And stress is the absolute enemy of sleep. It becomes this vicious cycle. You worry about the score, that makes you sleep poorly, you get a bad score, you worry more.
So what should someone do if they suspect they might be falling into that trap?
Well, the first thing might be to simply take a break from tracking altogether for a while. See if that reduces the anxiety. If the sleep problems persist, especially if it's chronic insomnia, the gold standard treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. That directly addresses the unhelpful thoughts and behaviors around sleep. Another strategy could be to just check the data, much less frequently, maybe only once a week, looking for broad trends rather than getting caught up in the nightly numbers.
It's a really valuable reminder, isn't it, that the tracker data is just a tool. It's information. It's not the ultimate judge of your sleep health. How you feel is still paramount.
Precisely. You always need to integrate the objective data with your subjective experience. How rested do you actually feel during the day? How's your energy, your mood? Does it align with what the tracker says? Sometimes the data might look bad, but you feel fine, or vice versa. Your subjective feeling of restfulness is incredibly important.
And just finally on tech, you mentioned smart mattresses. How are they different? What's the promise there?
This is where the technology starts to move beyond just tracking sleep to actively augmenting or improving it. Devices like the 8-Sleep mattress, for example, they don't just measure your sleep stages, heart rate, breathing rate.
They actually do something with that data.
Yes, they use it to intelligently adjust the temperature of the mattress surface, zone by zone, throughout the night.
Temperature, why is that important?
Because our body temperature regulation is incredibly tightly linked to our sleep cycle. To fall asleep easily, your core body temperature needs to drop slightly. To maintain deep sleep, you generally need to stay slightly cool. And then your temperature needs to rise again towards morning to help you wake up naturally.
And the mattress can manage that automatically based on your individual sleep.
That's the idea. It learns your patterns, senses your current sleep stage and physiology minute by minute, and then subtly adjusts the heating or cooling of the mattress surface to keep you in your optimal thermal zone for each stage of sleep. It's a really elegant use of technology, creating this constant, personalized thermal feedback loop to improve sleep quality and maybe even quantity.
That sounds quite sophisticated.
It is. And they're adding other features too, like detecting snoring and then maybe subtly adjusting the head elevation to help open the airway.
Yeah.
These kinds of smart beds, I think, represent a really promising new direction for actually enhancing sleep, not just measuring it.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into sleep science. Some truly surprising stuff there. The social impacts, the genetic quirks, the brain's cleaning system, how meds affect it, the importance of quality and regularity, and how technology fits in.
It certainly shows how much more we're learning about this fundamental biological need and just how fast the science is moving on so many different fronts at once.
Right. So let's shift gears now. We're staying with cutting-edge science, but broadening the view to the whole future of life science, drawing on that conversation with Sir John Bell.
Yes, a really influential figure, long distinguished career in genetics, immunology, formerly the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, and now he's heading up this significant new venture called the Ellison Institute of Technology, the EIT, based over here in the UK.
Okay, tell us of the EIT. What's its mission? What makes it different?
Well, it's incredibly ambitious. It's funded by Larry Ellison, the tech entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And its mission is really broad, using state-of-the-art science and technology, especially AI and machine learning, to tackle some of the world's biggest problems.
Not just health?
Not just health, no. Healthcare and disease are major focuses, obviously, but also critical areas like food security, climate change, even things like global governance. It's a very wide scope.
And you mentioned a unique approach or model.
Yes, that's a key difference. The vision is that, where possible, the solutions they develop should actually be commercially viable and sustainable. It's structured more like a company than a traditional academic foundation. The aim is to create tangible products, platforms, services that have real-world impact and can sustain themselves, rather than relying solely on grants or donations. It's a more entrepreneurial take on philanthropic science, perhaps.
And the scale sounds pretty huge.
Oh, absolutely massive. They're building this enormous campus, potentially millions of square feet eventually, and planning to recruit around 5,000 people. Really top talent from across the globe.
5,000 people, wow.
Yeah, The focus is on getting the absolute best minds, the top 1% in their fields, and giving them the resources and freedom to take risks on really novel, potentially disruptive ideas that might struggle to get funding through more traditional channels.
And it works closely with Oxford University. How does that relationship function?
Yes, there's a very strong synergistic link. Oxford's been very supportive. The idea is that the EIT complements Oxford's strengths and the wider UK life science ecosystem. One specific gap Sir John mentioned EIT aims to fill is helping promising UK science scale up. Historically, the UK's been great at discovery, but less good at growing those discoveries into large, impactful companies. EIT's structure and funding are designed to allow them to build full-stack solutions, taking things right through development.
That makes sense. And speaking of the UK's life science landscape, Sir John Bell himself was hugely influential in establishing the UK as a world leader in human genomics, wasn't he?
Absolutely pivotal. His influence was immense. There were really three massive, successive initiatives that built that leadership in large-scale human genomics data.
Which were?
The UK Biobank, then Genomes England, and the newest one, Our Future Health. Each kind of built on the last, tackling different aspects of using genomic information.
Let's start with UK Biobank. That's become this incredible global resource for researchers. How did that come about?
Well, it really grew out of Oxford's traditional strength in large-scale epidemiology, studying disease patterns in big populations. The key insight was realizing you needed enormous numbers of people, huge cohorts, to reliably detect the often small effects of individual genetic variations on common diseases.
So the idea was born to recruit a massive group.
Exactly. The incredibly ambitious plan was to recruit 500,000 people across the UK, collect loads of health data questionnaires, physical measures, but critically, also collect biological samples, like DNA, and get consent to link all that to their ongoing NHS health records.
500,000 people linked to health records. That sounds like a logistical nightmare to set up. Was it difficult?
Extremely difficult. Sir John talked about facing massive resistance initially from peer reviewers. People doubted it was even feasible. Could you recruit that many? Get reliable data, manage the NHS linkage, even do the genetics on that scale back then. But they persevered, got crucial funding from the MRC and Wellcome Trust, and built this resource that is now genuinely used by tens of thousands of researchers around the world every single day. It completely changed the game for genetic epidemiology.
An amazing achievement. And then came Genomes England. That shifted the focus more towards using genomics in actual clinical care.
Yes, exactly. As the cost of sequencing a whole genome just plummeted, thanks to new technology, the idea emerged. Could we use this powerful tool right now within the NHS to help diagnose rare diseases?
Because many rare diseases have a genetic cause, but finding it is hard.
Precisely. It can be like finding a needle in a genetic haystack. Whole genome sequencing gives you the whole code. This project got really important backing from the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, partly driven apparently by his own family's experience with a rare condition.
And did that face resistance too?
Oh, yes. So John mentioned massive resistance again, this time from parts of the medical establishment, perhaps understandably wary of the complexity, the cost, the interpretation challenges. But again, they pushed through, sequenced 100,000 genomes from patients with rare diseases and their families, make huge numbers of diagnoses. And it continues today with things like a program for sequencing newborns to spot treatable conditions incredibly early.
And the third and most recent big initiative is Our Future Health. What's the ambition there?
Our Future Health really represents another shift in focus, moving towards prevention and early diagnosis. It came out of the UK's life science strategy back in 2017. A key push came from the pharmaceutical industry, who basically said the UK needs to focus on the future of healthcare, stopping people getting sick in the first place, or catching diseases much, much earlier.
Moving away from just treating established disease.
Exactly. Moving decisively towards identifying people at high risk before symptoms appear, or diagnosing conditions at stage 0 or stage 1 when treatments are often far more effective. The scale here is just enormous. The goal is to recruit 5 million adults in the UK.
5 million. That's about 10% of the adult population.
It is. It's staggering. The idea is to track their health over many years, combine genetic data with lots of other health information, lifestyle data, maybe even data from wearables.
To do what exactly?
Primarily to build incredibly detailed models of who is likely to develop which diseases, enabling much earlier identification of risk. And secondly, to create a massive platform for efficiently testing new preventative therapies or early diagnostic tools on a huge scale.
And has recruitment going for that.
Despite delays due to the pandemic, it's been incredibly fast. Millions have already registered, and large numbers have provided samples and data. It's going to generate this unbelievably rich multi-omics data set.
Multi-omics. So beyond just the genome sequence.
Yes, much beyond. Looking at proteins, proteomics, metabolites, metabolomics, maybe epigenetic markers, even things like organ clocks, biological markers, trying to estimate the functional age of different organs. It's about building a much more holistic, dynamic picture of health and disease risk over time.
That sounds like it could truly revolutionize preventative medicine. But it must require new ways of thinking, clinically and regulatory-wise.
Absolutely. You need new types of clinical trials designed for prevention in healthy populations. You need regulators to think about approving diagnostics based on predicting future risk, not just confirming present disease. It's a huge shift.
And driving a lot of this potential, you mentioned AI is absolutely central to the Ellison Institute's vision.
Yes, AI is seen as a core enabling platform, underpinning pretty much everything they do, whether it's health, climate, food, whatever. And they have a massive advantage here because of the huge compute power funded by Larry Ellison.
Access to that level of computing being essential for modern AI.
Absolutely critical. Training these incredibly complex machine learning models on the vast data sets we're talking about requires enormous computational resources. Few universities or traditional institutes can compete on that scale.
And they're bringing in the talent to use it?
Yes, actively recruiting top AI and machine learning talent from around the world, including people from places like Google DeepMind. So you have this potent combination: world-class talent, massive compute, and access to the UK's unique, rich healthcare and genomic data assets. Those are the three essential pillars.
Talent, compute, data. Makes sense. Eric Topol's review for the NHS actually highlighted the UK's potential to lead in AI for health, didn't it? Building on that genomic strength.
It did, yes. The potential is clearly there.
And you mentioned a second key technology platform at EIT working alongside AI.
That's right. Generative biology, or synthetic biology as it's often called. That's the other core platform. They've recruited a real leader in the field, Professor Jason Chin from Cambridge, to head that up.
Generative or synthetic biology, what does that involve?
It's essentially about designing and building new biological parts, devices, and systems, or redesigning existing ones for useful purposes.
So engineering life, basically. What kind of applications are we talking about?
Things like being able to synthesize huge stretches of DNA from scratch to encode new functions, engineering cells or microbes to act as diagnostics or therapeutics, or to produce valuable chemicals, even potentially transforming plants to make them more nutritious or resilient to climate change. It's about using engineering principles to manipulate biology in predictable ways.
And how does that connect with AI?
They work synergistically. AI can analyze vast amounts of biological data to help design these new biological systems, predict how they'll behave, and then generative biology provides the tools to actually build and test those designs in the real world. This capability can then feed into all of EIT's main focus areas, creating new health solutions, new food production methods, new environmental technologies. It's moving from just reading biology to actively writing and editing it.
Okay, let's move to another area where Sir John has deep expertise and where EIT is making a big push: understanding the immune system. You called it the next great frontier.
I think it really is. If you think about it, our clinical tools for assessing someone's immune status are still surprisingly crude. Often it boils down to just counting different types of white blood cells.
Which doesn't tell you much about how well they're actually functioning.
Exactly. The immune system is this incredibly complex network of different cell types. T cells, B cells, innate immune cells interacting through countless molecular signals, antibodies, including autoantibodies that can cause disease. It's vastly complex, and without a really deep molecular understanding of an individual's immune state, making big breakthroughs in immune-related diseases is really hard.
Which covers a huge range: infections, cancer, autoimmune diseases.
A massive range. Sir John described our current approach in this area as sometimes feeling like pinning the tail on the donkey. A bit of guesswork in the dark. We need a much more detailed map.
So what's EIT doing specifically to try and build that map to get beyond the guesswork?
They're establishing a very significant long-term project focused on deep immunophenotyping, basically characterizing immune cells and responses at a really detailed molecular level.
And how are they going about that? What's the methodology?
A key part involves using human challenge models in a very careful and controlled way.
Human challenge models, what does that mean? Exposing people to diseases?
Yes, essentially. It involves carefully selecting healthy volunteers and exposing them to controlled, safe doses of specific pathogens like common cold viruses or bacteria, or giving them vaccines.
And the purpose is to watch the immune system react in real time.
Precisely. It allows researchers to observe the entire immune response right from the beginning in a controlled setting. They can track exactly how different parts of the immune system, different cell types, different molecules respond over time at a very fine-grained molecular level. It gives you much richer, more dynamic information than just taking a snapshot blood sample from someone who's already sick, or even someone healthy.
And I'm guessing AI is absolutely essential for making sense of all the data that generates.
Utterly essential. The sheer volume and complexity of the data from these kinds of studies is immense. You're looking at changes in gene expression across thousands of genes in different immune cells, sequencing the receptors on T cells and B cells to understand their diversity, measuring hundreds of thousands of different proteins and metabolites in the blood.
It sounds overwhelming.
It would be, without powerful computational tools. AI and machine learning are critical for finding the patterns in that complexity. Understanding how all the different components, T cells, B cells, innate immunity, antibodies interact. Figuring out which interactions actually lead to a protective immune response versus those that might lead to disease or side effects.
So the ultimate goal is to build a kind of predictive model of the immune system.
Yes, to build a really solid scientific foundation for predicting and anticipating what kind of immune response you need to generate for effective protection against a specific infection, or for effective therapy against cancer, or to calm down an autoimmune attack.
And if you can predict it, you can potentially design interventions to achieve it.
That's the hope. If we understand exactly what a good immune response looks like at the molecular level for, say, flu, we can design much better vaccines to elicit exactly that response. If we know how cancer evades the immune system, we can design immunotherapies to overcome those evasion tactics. Or, for autoimmune diseases, if we can pinpoint the specific rogue immune cells or pathways, we can develop much more targeted therapies.
Like the recent breakthroughs in treating diseases like lupus you mentioned.
Exactly. Treatments targeting specific types of B cells, like those expressing CD19, have shown remarkable results in some severe autoimmune diseases, illustrating the power of this kind of molecular precision. It's about moving beyond broad immunosuppression to highly targeted interventions.
And Sir John mentioned this major immunology project at EIT is starting soon.
Yes, he said they expect data collection using these challenge models and deep phenotyping to begin within the next 6 months or so. It's a major undertaking, but the potential payoff for understanding health and disease is enormous. It really is exciting work. All right, just finally, the conversation ended with a brief reflection on the broader state of global science, didn't it? Potential challenges ahead.
Yes, there was a brief, quite poignant exchange near the end, alluding to potential headwinds facing science globally, maybe political disruption, challenges to international collaboration. Sir John shared his perspective on that.
And what was his take? Was he pessimistic?
Not entirely pessimistic, but realistic perhaps. He strongly emphasized the inherently global nature of science, that despite national borders or politics, scientists everywhere are fundamentally part of a shared community working on common problems. He stressed America's indispensable role as a scientific powerhouse, given its scale and impact.
And his hope for the future. His view was that the global scientific community needs to stick together, to lean in collectively to support the scientific enterprise, hoping that any political disruptions are temporary. He made the point that the complex structures supporting international science collaborations take a long time to build, but can be damaged quite quickly, underlining the need for continued vigilance and support from society and governments everywhere.
A thoughtful note to end on. Well, this has been quite the journey from the unexpected ways sleep affects our social lives and the intricate mechanics of brain cleaning, right through to the future being forged by genomics, AI, synthetic biology, and a deeper understanding of our own immune systems at places like the EIT.
It really covers a vast landscape, doesn't it? And it
Yep.
makes it clear these aren't just abstract topics for scientists. They are fundamentally reshaping our understanding of health, of aging, and they have profound implications for how we might live and work in the future. The pace of change is just incredible.
It certainly gives you, the listener, a lot to think about. Given these rapid advances, this power to understand health at such a deep level, how might our personal responsibility for managing health change in the coming years? And what does all this mean for you professionally, especially if you're in an industry touched by biology, data, and technology? The ripple effects are going to be immense over the next decade.
They really are. The future of health is being written right now in labs and data centers across the world.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive insightful and valuable, please do consider taking a moment to rate and share the show. It really helps others find it.